The water remembered everything. That was what the old one said on the floating platform villages that still used wood salvaged from drowned buildings, that still smelled faintly of the world that had been. The water remembered the cities it swallowed, remembered the roads and the fields and the hospitals and the schools, remembered the children who once ran through parks that now lay 40 meters below the surface, preserved in darkness and cold and silence. The water remembered, and it did not forgive, and it gave nothing back. Cale Dren stood at the bow of the skimmer and watched the horizon the way men used to watch the news, looking for something bad and being right every time. He was not a tall man. He had the lean, weathered look of someone who had burned off every calorie he ever consumed and then burned off a few more. His face was a map of bad decisions and worse weather, a long scar along his jaw from a hull cable that snapped in a storm 3 years ago, a nose that had been broken twice and set wrong the first time, and eyes the color of the sea when it doesn't want you in it. He wore a patched canvas jacket with the sleeves torn off, and on his left forearm, faded but still legible, was a tattoo that read, "Still here." The skimmer rocked beneath him. Behind him, the village of Parada floated on its 12 pontoon sections, lashed together with cable and desperation. 460 people clinging to the idea that tomorrow would not be the day the whole thing finally came apart. He heard Sola before he saw her. She always moved like she was trying not to spill something, careful and deliberate, which Kael had once mistaken for timidity, until she broke a tribute collector's wrist with a wooden lever and told him to come back when he had manners. "They're early," she said, standing beside him. "They're always early when they think you've been saving. Have we?" "Some." He didn't look at her. "Not enough." Out on the water, the shapes were resolving. The Kareth fleet came the way a storm came, slowly, then all at once. 3 heavy platforms, converted cargo hulks running on fuel nobody else could get, dragging their weight across the sea with the arrogance of things that have never been told no. And behind the platforms, moving in the water, the shapes, the sharks. You could see them if the light was right. Dark chevrons beneath the surface. 30-40 animals moving in loose formation. Moving wrong. That was the thing that made every person who saw them for the first time go very quiet. The sharks moved wrong, not with the loose opportunism of wild animals. They moved with the deliberateness of troops. They moved because something told them to. Cale had heard explanations. Some said it was bioelectric harnesses wired into the animals' nervous systems. Some said it was a frequency array on the command platform that the sharks couldn't filter out. Some said it was something else entirely, something older, a frequency in the blood, a resonance in the water, a voice that the deep ocean answered. He didn't know. He only knew that where the Kareth went, the sharks went, and where the sharks went, people drowned. The lead platform pulled alongside Parada's northern pontoon bridge, and the boarding ramp came down with a clang that Cale felt in his back teeth. The tribute collector came down the ramp like he owned the walk. His name was Asen. He wore Kareth gray, which was not so much a color as the absence of any color that might suggest he had ever been anything other than what he was. He carried a ledger. "Dren," he said. It wasn't a greeting. "Asen." Cale walked to meet him because making him walk the full distance would cost Parada something, and he was already calculating the cost of everything. "You're 2 weeks ahead of schedule." Warlord's discretion. Asen opened the ledger, did not look at it. He looked at the village behind Cale the way a man appraises livestock. "We're doubling the assessment." "That's not possible." "The assessment is doubled, Dren. Water allocation remains unchanged." He finally looked at the ledger. "Or we reduce water allocation to reflect the shortfall." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 460 people doing the math in their heads and coming up with the same answer Cale had already come up with. No water. 4 days, maybe 5 if the rain came. The rain hadn't come in 11 weeks. "You'll get what we have," Cale said. Asen made a note in the ledger. "We'll take an equivalent in labor." "You'll get what we have," Cale said again. Not louder, not softer, the same. Asen looked up from the ledger. He had the kind of face that had learned to interpret disagreement as a processing error. "Are you certain you want to begin this conversation, Dren?" "I'm already in it." What happened next happened in the order it always happened. The Karath soldiers moved to the flanks. The sharks moved in the water, not circling, advancing, coming along the pontoons the way water comes under a door, spreading, filling the space available. 3 people on the south bridge stumbled back from the edge. An old woman grabbed a child and pressed back against the nearest wall of the water distillation shed. and Kale did not move. He was not a brave man in the way stories describe brave men. He was not fearless. He was afraid right now. He could feel it in his hands, a slight trembling that he was controlling by pressing his thumb against the scar on his jaw. He was afraid, and he didn't move because he had done the calculation, and the calculation said the same thing from every direction. If he moved, if Parada moved, they would keep moving, and eventually there would be nowhere left to move to. Last chance, Austin said. We'll load the crates, Kale said. The tribute was taken. The double amount. Parada's reserve for the next 3 months, gone in 2 hours of loading and recording, and the quiet shame of watching armed men take what your people worked for. Kale stood at the bridge and watched every crate go and said nothing and kept his hands still. When the fleet pulled away, Sola came to stand beside him again. There's a girl, she said. From the eastern cluster. She came in on the night before last. Mason Scrim's crew took her. Kale said nothing. Her name is Wren. Her father was Dale Morrow. Kale turned to look at Sola then. Dale Morrow had been dead for 3 years. He had been, depending on who you asked, a fool, a mystic, a legend, or a very specific kind of dangerous. The kind that doesn't come from violence but from knowledge that the people in power have decided is too valuable to let anyone else have. Dale Morrow had been a shark caller. Not in the Kareth way, with their harnesses and their frequencies and their hardware. In the old way. The way the water remembered. They took her to the command platform? Kale asked. Scrim's crew, yes. She's not dead. They don't kill what they think they can use. Sola paused. She's a child, Kale. I know. And if she's what they think she is, I know. He was quiet for a long moment. The sea stretched around them in every direction. Enormous and indifferent, the color of old iron. Somewhere beneath the surface, the sharks were still there. Still moving to a frequency that wasn't theirs. Get me Thorn and Bricks and the Fellas Brothers, he said. And the submersible. The one we're not supposed to have. Sola looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back into the village, and Kale stayed at the bow and looked at the horizon, and the horizon looked back the way it always did, giving nothing away. They left after dark. The submersible was 14 years old and had been repaired so many times that almost none of the original material remained. Kale called it the afterthought. It could hold 6 people if they didn't mind hating each other, which was fine because none of them liked each other much anyway. Thorn was a former Kareth soldier who had defected when he discovered that his employers had a policy of feeding inconvenient witnesses to the sharks. Bricks was a salvage diver who was missing 2 fingers on her right hand from a cable accident and was one of the best navigators in the Eastern Sea sector. The Fellows brothers, Oren and Cam, were twins who communicated primarily through looks and had, between them, broken more Kareth equipment than any other 2 people alive. Nobody asked Kale why they were doing this. They had all done the math. The command platform sat at the center of the Kareth fleet like a tumor, trailing cables and antenna arrays, and the low hum of systems that the other platforms deferred to. It was massive, the converted hull of what had once been a supertanker, retrofitted over years until it bore almost no resemblance to its original purpose. On its lower decks, below the waterline, were the control rooms, the frequencies, the systems that reached into the water and turned wild animals into soldiers. If she's actually a shark caller, Bricks said, her voice low in the cramped interior of the afterthought, they're going to put her in the array. I know, Kale said. That means she's wired in. Physically, I know. Which means cutting the connection while the array is active could. Bricks, he looked at her, I know. She went quiet. The submersible moved through the dark water with the particular sound of something that might fall apart at any moment, but had chosen not to, at least for now. What Kale knew, and what he had not shared, was that Dale Morrow had taught him something once. Not everything. Dale was careful about what he taught and to whom, but something. A frequency. A specific pattern of sound that could be generated by a human voice in a very particular register. Something that sat below the range of comfortable speech. Something that required training to produce without doing damage to yourself. Dale had said it was not a command. He was very specific about that. You're not telling them what to do, Dale had said. They had been sitting on the edge of a platform in the eastern cluster, legs hanging over dark water. The sharks had been nearby. Kale had known, though he couldn't see them. You're not giving orders. You're just talking to them in a language they already know. What are you saying to them? Kale had asked. Dale had smiled, which was rare for him, a small and complicated expression. The same thing any living thing says to any other living thing when it wants to be understood. I am here. I am not your enemy. I know what you are. Kale had thought about that for 3 years. The bottom hull of the command platform was a landscape of barnacles and corrosion and cable runs, and Bricks navigated it by feel and memory and a handheld sonar that produced grainy images of questionable reliability. They found the maintenance hatch that Thorne knew about. He had used it once, going the other direction, and they sealed the afterthought to it and waited for the pressure to equalize. The interior of the platform smelled of salt and machine oil, and the particular sourness of a closed system that had been recycling its air for too long. The maintenance corridor was narrow, lit by amber emergency strips, and Kale moved through it with his back to the wall, and his breathing, controlled, and his mind doing the thing it did in bad situations, reducing the world to the next meter, the next decision, the next breath. They found the girl in the 3rd level. She was attached to the array, as Bricks had predicted. Not cruelly, the Kareth understood value, but functionally, with induction contacts at her temples and wrists, and a harness that held her upright in the cradle at the center of the control room. She was perhaps 16, small and dark-haired, and she was conscious. Her eyes were open, and they were the eyes of someone who has gone very far into a place that other people cannot follow. The control room had 4 operators. Kale took note of them without looking directly at any of them, the way you take note of water before you have to cross it. Thorne and Oren Fellas went left. Cam Fellas went right. Brick stayed at the door, and Kale walked directly toward the array, which was the wrong thing to do by every tactical standard he knew, and the right thing to do for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, except that there was a child in a harness, and he had made a calculation, and this was the number it produced. The operators responded the way people respond when something happens that isn't in the manual. Slowly, then all at once. 2 of them reached for the alert panel. The 3rd reached for a weapon. The 4th just stared. Things happened quickly after that. They happened in the way that violent things happen in enclosed spaces, which is not the way stories describe. Not with clarity and heroism and the camera at the right angle, but with confusion and noise and the specific sick feeling of realizing you are in the middle of something that cannot be undone. When it was over, which happened faster than Kale would have expected, the 4 operators were secured. The alert had not been triggered. Bricks had her hands on the panel and was reading the system schematics with the focus of someone diffusing something. "Don't cut the primary feed," she said. "If she's meshed in, a hard cut will." She stopped. "She might not survive a hard cut. Then how do we? We have to bring the array down gradually. Step the frequency. Taper it." She was already moving. "Give me 4 minutes." Kale went to the girl, Ren. He crouched in front of her, which put him at eye level with her, and she looked at him from wherever she was, from the far place the frequency had taken her. "My name's Kale," he said. "I knew your father." Something moved in her eyes, not much. A shift, the way deep water shifts when something large changes direction far below. "We're getting you out," he said. "But I need you to stay here for a few more minutes. Can you do that?" She didn't answer. He hadn't expected her to. He stayed crouched in front of her, and he kept talking, quietly, the way Dale had once talked to him about the sharks, and he watched her eyes and kept his breathing steady. He was not aware, at first, of what was happening in the water outside. Bricks was the one who noticed. She said his name once, and he turned, and she was looking at the external sensors, at the display that showed the shark formation, and the formation was changing, not under the platform, not in response to the array. The sharks were moving away from the fleet, not in panic, not the explosive scatter of animals suddenly released from control. They were moving with purpose, moving towards something. "Dren," Brick said, and her voice had a quality he had not heard in it before. "What did you do?" "Nothing," he said. "The formation is breaking. They're not responding to the frequency anymore." She looked at the readouts. Something else is redirecting them. He thought about Dale Morrow sitting on a platform edge in the eastern cluster. He thought about the thing Dale had said. Not a command, not orders, just talking, in a language they already know. He looked at Ren. Her eyes were different now. Still far away, still in the deep place. But different. The way the sea is different at sunrise when the light reaches the places it doesn't usually reach. "Bricks," he said. "How much of the fleet's security depends on the sharks?" She understood the question immediately. "Operationally, most of it. They run 6 boats on patrol, but the sharks are the..." She paused. "They're the thing that makes the rest of it unnecessary. And if the sharks aren't there, then it's 6 boats and a lot of soldiers on a platform with no significant external defense." She looked at him. which is still a lot of soldiers. I know, he said, but it's different. He turned to Thorn. Get her out of the harness, carefully. Bricks will guide you. And you? Thorn said. Kale stood up. He rolled his shoulders once, the old habit, the pre-action inventory. Everything working, everything accounted for. He pressed his thumb to the scar on his jaw. I'm going to go talk to the Warlord, he said. What he knew about Warlord Ian Fian, and what most people in the Eastern Sea sector knew, was the version of the man that the tribute collectors carried with them as a warning. Vast, untouchable, in command of an army of sea predators, able to cut off water to a village so effectively that the silence of the supply ship's engines became a sound of its own, a sound people had learned to dread. The legend was the weapon. The legend did the work that soldiers couldn't do, keeping 400 villages compliant across thousands of square kilometers of empty ocean. Kale had spent a long time thinking about what sits inside a legend, and decided it was usually something much smaller than the legend itself. Fian's personal quarters were on the upper deck, which was where Kale went, moving through the platform with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where they're going and would prefer that everyone else assume they belong there. He passed two soldiers who looked at him with the mild suspicion of people who spend their lives surrounded by compliance and have become dulled to it. He kept walking. The door to Fian's quarters was guarded by two men who were not mild. They were the kind of soldiers who had graduated past compliance into something harder. They had the specific stillness of people who were very comfortable with violence. Wrong floor, the nearer one said. Right floor, Kale said. Wrong warlord. He said it because it was true, and because he wanted Fian to hear it, and because a door doesn't mean the same thing when the thing you were using to keep it closed is no longer there. He did not get into Fian's quarters easily. That would be a false account of how it happened. What actually happened was that he fought the two guards in a corridor that was too narrow for the kind of fighting the guards had trained for, and he used the narrowness the way you use any environmental feature that is available to you, and he arrived at Fian's door with his nose bleeding and a new pain in his left side that he catalogued and set aside for later. Fian was standing when Kale entered. He was a man in his 60s, which out here was genuinely old in the way that requires constant maintenance and a supply of things other people don't have. He was well fed, which was the most visible marker of power in a world where most people were not. He had the eyes of someone who has spent a long time being the answer and has forgotten what a question feels like. You're from one of the tribute villages, Fian said. He wasn't afraid. Kale gave him that. Parada, Kale said. You came here to make some kind of point about the assessment. It wasn't a question. Fian had decided what was happening and was working from that decision. I came here because your grip slipped, Kale said, and I wanted you to know it before you found out some other way. Fian looked at him for a moment. Then he reached for the alert switch on the wall behind him. They're not coming, Kale said. Not quickly enough, anyway. Fian's hand stopped. Something moved across his face that was, Kale thought, the very early stages of the question he had forgotten how to ask. The array is down, Kale said. The girl is gone. Your sharks are currently responding to a different frequency, one you don't control and can't replicate, because it doesn't come from hardware. He paused. It comes from whoever Dale Morrow taught, which is his daughter. And you should have figured out earlier that things passed down through blood can't be confiscated. The silence in the room had weight to it. What do you want? Fian asked. It was, Kale thought, the right question. Maybe the first right question the man had asked in years. He felt something shift in the room when Fian asked it. Not relief, not satisfaction, but the specific quality of a space when a lie finally comes out of it, and the actual shape of things becomes visible. The assessment goes back to what it was, Kale said. Water allocation doubles for every village that's been shorted this year. The Eastern Cluster gets new filtration components. You have them, they're in your cargo manifest, I checked, and no retaliation. Not against Parada, not against the cluster, not against any individual who was involved in what happened tonight. And if I say no, then you say no with no sharks and a compromised array and a signal going out on Parada's long-range transmitter right now telling every village in the eastern sector what happened here tonight. Kale looked at him steadily. The legend only works if people believe in it. We just broke the mechanism. Fian was quiet for a long time. He was not, Kale thought, a stupid man. Stupid men didn't build empires, even bad ones. He was a man who had found a lever and used it until the lever was the whole world. And now someone had shown him that levers are just pieces of metal and the world is bigger than the lever. You'd have to hold the threat indefinitely, Fian said finally. You can't maintain the shark connection forever. The girl would break. Maybe, KL said. But you'd have to try to reassert control while not knowing how long she'll hold, or where she is, or what the signal is. And every day you spend trying, it's another day the villages are talking. He paused. You built this on fear. Fear needs maintenance. This is expensive maintenance. Another silence. The ship moved under them. The sea pressed against the hull with the patient indifference it had applied to every human structure for as long as the flooding had been happening, and KL stood in the middle of the motion and waited. The assessment, Fian said. I'll consider the numbers. You'll confirm them, KL said, tonight, in writing, on the transmitter that the eastern sector can receive. Something in Fian's face moved. KL watched it. Not quite anger, something older than anger. The thing that lives underneath power when power has been there long enough. The fear of what happens when it isn't. You're from Parata, Fian said again, and this time it did not sound like a statement of fact, but like a man trying to locate himself in a story that had changed on him. I'm from wherever the water doesn't get to, KL said. Same as you. They stood in the room with the sound of the sea around them, and Fian made the calculation that KL had made weeks ago and months ago and years ago. The one that always came out the same when you ran it honestly. There are more of us than there are of them, and the only thing that has ever made that fact irrelevant is the belief that it doesn't matter. Fian confirmed the terms. He did it in writing. He did it on the transmitter. KL stood in the room and watched him do it and felt nothing dramatic. That was the honest account of it. He did not feel triumph. He felt the particular flatness that comes after sustained effort, a kind of gray quietness, like the sea after a storm. When the surface is still and you know the water underneath is still churning, but the visible part has decided to be calm. He found Thorn and Brix and the fellow's brothers in the lower corridor. Ren was with them, walking on her own, which was good. She looked the way someone looks when they have been in a very loud place and have recently come out of it, not shell-shocked, but readjusting, recalibrating, letting the ordinary sounds of the world come back one at a time. She looked at KL when she saw him. You knew my father, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said you were stubborn. KL looked at her. He wasn't wrong. She almost smiled, not quite. The bones of a smile, the structure of it, the indication that one was possible at some future point. They went back through the maintenance corridor, and down through the hatch, and into the afterthought. And Brix sealed the hatch and ran the equalization, and the submersible detached from the hull with a sound like a slow exhale, and then they were in the water, moving through the dark. KL sat against the forward bulkhead with his knees up and the pain in his side catalogued and acknowledged and set firmly aside. The afterthought's engines made their sound, the sound that meant it was still choosing not to fall apart, at least for now. Ren sat across from him. She was looking at nothing, or at something he couldn't see. After a while she said, without looking at him, they're still out there. The sharks? They'll go back to their own patterns now, without the array. They'll go where they want to go. She paused. But they remember. What do they remember? She thought about it. The submersible moved through the dark water, 40 meters below the surface, moving through the black. That there's a difference, she said, between being used and being talked to. KL thought about that. He pressed his thumb to the scar on his jaw, the old habit, the inventory. Everything's still there. Everything's still working. Your father understood that, he said. I know. She was quiet for a moment. He said the mistake everyone makes with the sharks and with everything else is thinking that power is the same as the thing that creates it. The Karath have the array. The array is just a machine. What my father had, she stopped.
What?
He said it wasn't a gift. He said it was just patience and listening and being willing to be something in the water that wasn't a threat. The afterthought hummed and moved and chose, again, not to fall apart. We'll need to be ready, Brix said from the navigator's seat, when Fian decides that written agreements are only as good as the enforcement behind them. I know, KL said. The villages will need to organize, talk to each other, share resources, actually cooperate, not just agree that they should. She paused. That's harder than what we just did. I know, KL said again. You have a plan for that? He thought about 460 people on a floating platform, about the weight of water allocation and tribute assessments, and the specific math of survival that everyone in the eastern sector had been doing for years. He thought about a man named Dale Morrow sitting on a platform edge and talking about a language that living things already know. He thought about the transmitter signal going out right now, spreading across the sea surface in every direction. "We start with the signal," he said. "We keep broadcasting. Every village that receives it broadcasts to the next one." Fien built his empire on isolation. The villages didn't know what the others were experiencing, didn't know the terms others were getting, couldn't coordinate. He looked at Bricks. "We fix that. And if moves against us before we can coordinate." Kale looked at Ren. She was looking back at him now, steady and clear-eyed, and he understood that whatever far place the array had taken her, she had come back from it and brought something with her. "He'd have to do it without the sharks," Kale said. "And the sharks aren't listening to him anymore." Parada came into view at first light, the pontoon sections visible against the pale horizon, the smoke from the distillation shed rising straight up in the still air. People were already on the bridges. Word had come ahead, the transmitter signal, and they were out on the bridges looking at the afterthought coming home. Kale climbed the boarding ladder with his side aching and his face dried with blood from his nose and the tattoo on his forearm, visible in the morning light. "Still here." Sola was at the top of the ladder. "Well," she said, "assessment is back to standard. Water allocation doubled. They'll deliver the filtration components within a week, or it goes out again on every frequency we have." She looked at him for a long moment. "And if they don't honor it, we make sure it costs more to ignore it than to keep it." He reached the bridge and stood on the pontoon with the sea moving under him, the familiar motion, the floor that was never entirely still. "That's always been the calculation. We just weren't organized enough to enforce it." Behind him, Ren stepped off the ladder onto the bridge. Some of the people watching made sounds. She was from the Eastern Cluster. They didn't know her face, but they knew the name and they knew what it meant. She stood among them with the morning light on her and looked out at the water. And the water looked back. And somewhere below the surface, something large moved in a direction it had chosen for itself. Sola said quietly to Kale, "What happens now?" He looked at the sea. The sea was the sea, immense and old, and holding everything it had ever taken. All the roads, and the fields, and the cities, and the children who ran through parks. All of it down there in the dark and the cold. Remembered. "We build something," he said, "on top of all of it. The way we always have." The sun came up over the eastern sea sector and found 460 people on a floating village that had been there yesterday and would be there tomorrow, and in the water around it, moving freely, the great shapes turned toward open ocean. Nobody commanded them, nobody told them where to go. They just went, and the sea, which remembered everything, let them.